Welcome back to another Maestro's Vibe. On this vibe, we're going to have an amazing scholar, amazing friend, Annalise Klein, where we're going to be talking about culturally relevant science. I am Karina Hernandez, and I'm with...
And I'm Kevin Argueta here on the ones and twos.
Aloha, this is Juan Jefe Espinal coming back at y'all live. Honored to be back with y'all, our awesome audience, back here with another highly esteemed guest coming through the ranks, coming through the educational ranks, and really serving the community at large. I am honored to bring on the microphone someone who's been joining our journey since its inception. Annalise, welcome to Maestro's Vibe.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much. This is very surreal for me. Like I said, I've been looking forward to this for a very long time. So thank you for having me.
Yes, we're so glad to have you. You were part of our book club over the summer, and just like Juan said, you've been supporting us since the beginning, and we would like our audience to know a little bit more about you. Who is Annalise Klein?
That is a question. I'm going to talk a little bit about what I do, because I think that'll be enough. So I started teaching with you, Karina. I think day one we stepped off those planes together, and so yeah, back 2014 I started teaching at Konawaina Middle School. Shout out KMS, and I taught 8th grade science over there for 3 years. I've done work with Kamehameha schools with their West Hawaii Kilohana program. And then more recently, I've been a public charter school, high school science teacher, teaching AP Chem and geometry and all that stuff. Last year, then got the opportunity to go over to Uganda and do some work with culturally relevant science and coaching teachers. And that just sort of put me on this path of how do we scale up? How do we work with school systems? And so I am independently employed right now, which is a fun jump to make during COVID. But I'm a freelance education consultant, and I work with 2 schools right now. One is a school district that is tribally run up in Southwest Alaska. And I help them coach their teachers, design some culturally relevant science curriculum. And then the other, I do project-based learning, instructional coaching at a re-engagement site in Washington. So students who the traditional education model has not worked for them. And so they're coming back and they want to finish their degree. And so, yeah, this school helps them do it in creative ways. So that's who I am. That's what I'm doing right now.
That's such a cool journey, Annalise. So much for being here. When I was looking into the school district, and correct me if I'm wrong, I might pronounce this wrong, but Yoprit?
It's the Upiat School District.
Yeah, my apologies. Yeah. And I was looking a little bit about the demographics, thinking about, being culturally relevant. And it looks like you all serve a lot of minority students. Can you give our listeners a little bit of background of what type of students you serve in that area?
Absolutely. So this is actually a super interesting thing to explore. So it's 100% Native Alaskan in this school district. It's composed of 3 separate villages that are all connected by waterways. So you have to either be on a boat to get out of your village, or you can fly, or if it's winter, you can drive on the frozen river. But there are no roads connecting these 3 villages. And they're all Yupik people. So they come from the same tribe. And the interesting thing about the Yupik school district is that back in the 80s, they were the first school district in Alaska that the tribal government that took over and said, we are going to be in charge of our students' education. And so the tribal board is on the school, they are the school district board. So they're the ones who make the hiring decisions, the curriculum choices. You have to get approval for all of that through them. So it's really an amazing history of protest, of identity, of the way that they were creatively going to get sovereignty back for their tribe. And they're just some fantastic people who have led that for the district. Unfortunately, and as we know, on the Big Island, it can be difficult to their teachers, and getting good teachers, and especially getting teachers from your own community, can be really difficult. And so we have this dilemma right now where 100% Native Alaskan students, many of them are still fluent in their native language. And I think all but like one teacher is white, is from the lower 48. And so there is a huge disconnect between students' home culture and identity, and then who is making those power decisions in the classroom.
A story from small villages in Alaska that I think we can extrapolate to a lot of places. I mean, as an individual who came to this island of Hawaii from New York originally, with family that came there from the Dominican Republic originally, that idea of belonging and not belonging, and who's in power and who's making these decisions, are things that I think that we see reflected everywhere. So that's extremely interesting to see that there, and to see it in the makeup of the teachers and who's speaking for those kids and who's speaking to those kids. And now, how did you get involved with that work yourself?
Yeah, because so I am not Yupik. I've not spent very much time in Alaska, and so when how did I land in this role, and then what's my like responsibility in this role, is kind of a loaded identity that I am continuing to figure out and always be asking people their opinions on. So I knew one of my friend's younger sisters was actually a science teacher in one of the villages for several years. So they needed teachers. She was down in Oregon. They have these hiring fairs where they try to get teachers to come up. And so she taught 7th through 12th grade science for 3 years up there. And so I was just we would chat from time to time, and I was doing stuff, from Konawaina. I did chemistry for social justice projects in San Jose, where I was teaching, and just really did a lot of project-based and like looking at developing students' sense of self in science classes. And so we would chat. I'd work on a couple things with her and brainstorm. And then she connected me to the director of their Alaska Native Education Grant. So they have funds set aside, they have visions, they want to provide good education for their students. And then it's like, how do we do that? And there's this huge gap between people who are trained in education, and I'm doing these air quotes for people who are just listening, trained in education. Like, to become a teacher, that's a very arduous process. You have to be able to like go to college. And if you live in a very rural place, that means saying goodbye to your family. That means having the funds to pack up and move somewhere else. A lot of people might have responsibilities at home that they can't do that. So all of a sudden, like, now you're not getting teachers from your local area. You're not getting trained in pedagogy and, whatever that is. So I can speak some of that language. And I would say largely because of my training and learning as a teacher at Kamehameha, understood this beautiful thing that can happen when teachers take a step back and let go of their pride a little bit, particularly when you are teaching students that are not from the culture that you are. There can be a lot of anxiety, right? Like, you don't want to do anything wrong and you're having to do this. And sometimes that can manifest in very not great ways. So slowly coming around onto your question, I came in because I know specific pieces. I know project planning. I know a little bit about how to do project-based learning well for your own classroom. And so I think a lot of times we get really stuck in these grand, we have to change everything right now. And I just wanted to come, I was like, I just want to come alongside teachers and be like, I know you're tired. I know you do a lot. Like, so if you have an idea, tell me, and I'll work on like researching, talking to people, planning it out, figuring out like what an assessment can look like that's not a test. And then you can try it and we'll adapt it. And so that's what I've been doing. So it's very small right now. And it's only with a handful of teachers who are interested in doing stuff. But the goal is we do a couple things, we start to gain momentum, kids are starting to be more engaged and feel like it's more representative of their identity and their life outside of the classroom.
And I do know, like, I think you answered that question in a really impactful way, because it is a loaded question. And I think, you know, once you think like any of us could really think about why we're here, why we're doing the work we're doing a little bit too much. But in reality, you got to do the work and think about those actions. And to me, I'm most fascinated in the fact that a lot of your work is in science.
Yeah. You want me just to, I'll just launch from there. I want to make sure.
I just never thought science, I mean, science in and of itself, it's a complex word even of its net. Are we allowed to say that on this show right now? Science?
Please say it. Science is so messed up. Okay. We're just going to put that out there. So oh man. So my parents, my mom is high school math teacher. My dad's a mechanical engineer. So we grew up and it was like, well, you know, they were just sciencey, STEMmy people. And I went to college wanting to major in English, which I did. But then I also majored in chemistry because, you know, like my brain just kind of worked that way. And I was like, oh, I can do that. And I love chemistry. Like, let's try and do the two together. And in college, I had some people who really mentored me on thinking about those two things similarly instead of two very different things. And I think chemists and I think poets see the world in very similar ways. You have to have a really fine observation skills. You have to look for patterns. You have to be able to create and have an imagination in your head. Mm-hmm. Now, where it gets really horrible is that we never have those conversations with our students when we talk about science at an elementary or secondary level. Maybe in elementary there is that creativity and, you know, whatever. But, you know, once you get to 8th grade and it's earth and space science or, you know, God forbid, chemistry in high school, I was bored to tears when I was in high school in my chemistry class. It was so boring. It was just math. And I think people very quickly think that science is unbiased. We can't challenge it. It's this like holy thing with these white men in wigs who like made these rules that we memorize and like Boyle's law. What's that? You know, like law, we call it a law, you know, and not to say that the things they came up with weren't true and they're so incredible human beings. It's just, it's all been built through a lens of a Western construct and a Western mindset. And we never present that. We never zoom out quite far enough, I think, for particularly our students of color to think, oh, maybe science, we can kind of like push and shape it a little bit differently. So I'll wrap this up, but when I went to Uganda last fall and came back, so that it was part of a Fulbright, and I had the opportunity to present at a couple conferences. And that's where I started to see like, oh, there's something to this, because I was always the only STEM person. There were lots of teachers who would come back, like, here's how we did this in English. Here's how we did this in social studies. Fantastic. We need that. Nobody was doing, they're like, we can't do it in science. I was like, we absolutely can. We need to globalize the way that we think about science and issues around science and problem solving. And there's a ton of examples and things to unpack with that, but that would probably be my medium-winded answer.
No, you bring up such a good point, Annalise. I mean, thinking about Uganda specifically, like earlier this year, right? We're not talking about like centuries ago where there was these men with wigs, white men with wigs that were creating these laws. Just this January, there was a Uganda climate activist.
Yes.
Yes, Vanessa Nakate, and
She's so cool.
she was cropped out of an AP picture
Yes.
with other white activists who were at the same joint conference, relaying the same message and trying to create these networks. But apparently, for whatever reason, and I think we know the reason, right? I think we know that it's because this Western mindset that you're speaking of, right? I mean, that's a clear example of we're not even going to highlight this person who is doing this work in Africa. So I just think that this is a topic that continues to plague our communities. And when we think about stories matter. And as we past election, values matter. So it's really important for us, to make sure that as educators that we are making sure we're not only, valuing things from our own cultures, but valuing things from cultures of our students and cultures of the people where we are in.
Absolutely. I'm curious how you heard about that story. Do you remember?
Twitter. Yeah.
I am a recent Twitterer. Is that the term? I don't know. I'm thoroughly enjoying myself on Twitter. She's a great follow. I'm sure maybe you follow her now, but she's great. And the thing that I loved about her was, Kevin, exactly like she called it out. And then it became even bigger news. And she's continued to comment on different ways that the press will talk about activism. I just pulled up, so I used her as an example in a talk I gave, and she had this really good quote. She said, environmental activism has been framed as Europe influencing the world, not the other way around. We've become used to our perspectives being excluded. So like, and this is what I did when I was talking to some other people, like come up with some names. Who are other environmental activists that we know? Like, who comes to mind?
Greta Thunberg is the big one.
Yeah, Greta. And like, again, she's awesome. She's doing amazing work. So Greta, I don't know if David Attenborough just came out with this new documentary. He's this older scientist from England, all about conservation. I think of Bill Nye. Yeah. He's kind of gotten into, right?
Skal, I think that's how you said his name. He's a young activist, indigenous individual, also does hip hop, and I feel like he's been on the forefront. Yeah, Skal, I think is his name.
Huh. So there are a lot of young people of color, and particularly indigenous activists. And people forget that we have to be critical of who are we only giving the mic to, there was something I was, now because I'm working with indigenous communities, and it actually made sense to what I remembered when I was teaching at Konawaina. The way we talk about environmental change is different. Like, from a Western construct, individual responsibility is really important. Conserving, reducing your use is really important. And that makes sense like in urban areas and stuff where you might not have a super close relationship to the land. But, for the people in Alaska that I'm working with, or our students in South Kona, they go hunting, they go fishing, they have subsistence practices that they still have. And and in Alaska, at least, they're having to fight sometimes the Department of Land putting certain, you can only fish from this time to this time in the year, or in this section of the river. And it messes with some traditional practices that they've had for a very, very long time. Because we're like, whoa, environmentalism, this is our, thing that we've brought from science and from academia, you don't know anything about this, we must put more laws in. And instead of listening and thinking about how other cultures have for a very long time thought about land management, about reciprocal relationships with humans and with the land. So I love that. I love that a lot.
That's something that I think is extremely important, because if you don't acknowledge people and you put those limits on them without really listening to them, that's how you disenfranchise people. Even with the term science, I think you're putting this term on it when science is all around us. We all come from scientists. It's how we exist. It's how we eat. You know what I mean? A fisherman, a navigator. I know we're going to bring up an awesome video from a Marshallese poet.
Yeah.
But the Marshallese wave map, if you've ever seen just examples of that kind of thing that helps them locate where they are in the middle of the ocean, like,
wild.
well, just and if we really think about that kind of science, like that's not science like in a lab where you're safe with goggles. That's like the kind of science that puts you on the forefront of discovery for your own self. Like you don't even know if you're going to make it or not, because you're looking at the star and you're trying to triangulate what you think might be a landmass out there somewhere, to then develop this place where we all get to enjoy now in this time, you know? So it's science that has brought us to this point, and it just may have never been defined as such. And I think, you know, when you bring it to students, and when you bring it to students around the world, because that's why I'm honored to have you here, you know, bringing this globally. How do we help students see themselves in science?
I have so many things that are coming to mind. I think you're naming a really important piece where I'm going to call it, I don't want to call it traditional science. Like science that we've taught in schools is very, like, you don't ever reflect on your own relationship to the rest of the world or to nature. I guess yourself never gets smaller. If anything, yourself gets bigger and blown up. You're the one asking the questions and isolating the variables, and, you know, writing your conclusion. And what I'm hearing Juan you saying about, you know, even the navigation or the wave maps, it's taking a very humble perspective and just observing and just listening. You know, when I did Kilohana, it was over the summers. We would take 6th to 8th graders who were public school students in West Hawaii who were Native Hawaiian, and it was trying to draw connections between what they were learning with like next generation science standards in school and what they learned at home and their heritage and what their ancestors had done. We'd go out on the land a lot. And one thing we did every single day was we would kilo, we would just sit outside 15 minutes and we would just observe. And sometimes, you know, kids would write stuff down. Other times they were just sitting. And we're starting to look at, like, how many different types of birds can we hear today versus yesterday? What do the clouds look like today? What do we think the weather's going to be like, you know, in an hour or so because of this? And I just think even a practice like that, which seems so simple, but it became this ritual that we did every day, really helped students see themselves within a much larger context. And if we only and I brought that practice into my like school year classroom the next year, 8th grade science, like teaching earth and space science, let's get outside. So sometimes we would just do our class outside, because I think even that shift was really important, to get kids thinking about themselves within the context of their world around them.
Yeah, and that's definitely beneficial in learning about the place that you're living, and it's science, right? We call it that, but it also helps with other skills, like students who can sit outside and observe. They can then use that same mentality when they're analyzing a text, right? Boom, what am I observing? Can I visualize myself here? What am I seeing? What am I listening to? So I think those skills can definitely be applicable in other courses. And that's just so cool that you share, you know, taking the students outside. Definitely going to do that when they come back. We did have our Socratic seminars out in the out in the lawn last school year, and the students really enjoy that. And so my step of trying to like switch up the classroom, because the classroom can be outside, not just in the four walls of this room.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm curious, Karina, like we, you know, I was teaching science, you teaching English, you taught a lot of my former students. But I know you've made some really intentional shifts in like the narratives that you bring into your classrooms. Like, what do you see from your students that shift in their mindset, or like what they can or can't do? I've now become the interviewer. I'm sorry, I'm taking
Okay, I love that. Well, I have definitely seen a shift. Like now, you know, I've always taught things fall apart since I got here, because that was part of the curriculum, and I just loved that book, and I just felt like there was a lot of connections between the Igbo culture and people of Hawaii. And in the past, I've had to like really like pose questions like, what do you know about West Africa, the continent of Africa? What do you know? And then now it's the responses that I got or that I've been getting are more like, they're like Hawaii. They, you know, they have their own native language. They are people who had their lives together before people came and took over. And now like we're jumping into those conversations right away. Whereas before it would take a lot more to get to that conversation. And even the scientist question I've asked them, I remember when we first started, one of the TFA core members did it as a big project, asking the students, what does a scientist look like? And I know you and I believe we had that conversation as well. And then now when I ask students, when we talk about our unit in building cultural bridges, when we talk about global climate change, and the narrative is different. Students now say, oh, yeah, well, it can be someone, it can be a kumu, it can be, you know, fisherman. Whereas before the answers will be, oh, it's someone in a lab, it's someone with a coat, and it's usually a white person. So
that's huge.
I have seen that perspective shift, and it's beautiful and it's great. And it's because of the work that teachers have done, like yourself at the middle school, to getting them think critically and beyond just like what is being thrown at them in the media. Because, you know, a lot of it is like what we see, what the focus is on, like the example that Kev was sharing, right? If someone were to look at just that picture without the other scientists in it, like that narrative doesn't get told. So I'm really happy that that's happening, and that people are speaking up, and that our students are also seeing themselves in this field where I never saw myself in it when I was growing up, for sure. Even though I grew up with a grandmother who followed the moon cycles, right? Of when to plant or when to So even that was, a scientist was so close to me, but I never got to truly appreciate that until now.
Totally. Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing that. That reminds me a lot of, so when I was in San Jose teaching AP chemistry, like our charter school was very much about like educational equity. Like it was all the students were students of color, but there was a mismatch of which students took AP STEM courses. You know, all the students who were taking the AP STEM courses for the most part were Asian, though they were only like 30% of our student population. And that didn't feel right. So like when I first, so I was told, you know, can you teach AP chemistry? So I said, sure. But I want 50-50 representation. Like, and I was teaching regular chemistry at the time, and you take that before you take AP. And it's a horrible class. Like, it's just hard. I didn't take it in high school. I was like, I don't want to put myself through that stress. It's a tough class. And so I was trying to recruit kids that I knew who wanted to be doctors, or who, you know, whatever. And there's so much resistance. They were like, Klein, this is not for me. My friends don't take this class. People like me don't take this class. And so we ended up creating an affinity space. And every single week they committed to like coming and meeting. And, you know, it started off really strong, and it definitely needed some work to like keep it going. But we would talk about like, who are we? Why are we here? What do we want to do with our career? why is this difficult? What emotions am I feeling this week? And yeah, I just remember one conversation with one of my students. She wanted to be a doctor. And I said, she was like, I'm about to quit this class. I can't do this. I said, look, if your grandma, she lived with her grandma. I was like, if your grandma got sick and had to go to the doctor, would you rather that she had a doctor who like looked like me, you know, and I grew up in a suburb and like, you know, I'm nice. I would be a nice doctor to your grandma. Or would you rather have like someone who was your, you know, next door neighbor's cousin, you know, who like they know what your grandma already cooked up for herself and drank because she knows what to do when she starts to feel sick and can speak her home language and just knows a little bit, has a deeper understanding of who your grandma is and what she's scared about and how to ask the right questions. I was like, you're not going to learn that in your chemistry classes and in medical school, but like that's the value that you bring, your perspective. And we need more people like you getting through AP chemistry, getting through a degree in a natural science, and getting into these careers so we can start to shift the way that we think about these things. And just the one last thing I want to say before I forget about it, going back to environmental science, you know, the global south is the one, they're predominantly feeling the effects of climate change right now. They're not the ones who contributed all the carbon emissions and industrialize things to pollute the way our earth is right now, but they're the ones who are having to deal with it. And so we don't have those conversations in our classes when we talk about environmental science, about who's responsible for a lot of this and who's dealing with it right now, whose lives are being disrupted. And that's why I think Vanessa Nakate is so important, because she has her pulse. She has a finger on that pulse. She knows what people are going through. The 10 countries with the least carbon emissions are all in Africa. And many of those countries are dealing with a lot of those things. Marshall Islands, right? The sea levels are rising. Their islands are disappearing. They weren't the ones who got us into this mess. And so I think, Karina, what you're saying, the more that we bring different narratives in and different perspectives, students stop just like memorizing things that they're supposed to know, and just like their knowledge is activated, and their belief systems and the way they want to solve problems and their opinions are activated in the classroom, instead of us telling them like, you'll do that later. Like that'll be your thing you do later. So yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So glad you're there.
Well, go ahead, Kev. You wanted to say something?
I was just saying, 2 points real quick. The first point is that, isn't it interesting that industrialization contributed so much to our global climate change? And when we think about where those natural resources came from for the countries to be able to industrialize, they came from what we deem, and I'm putting air quotes up, third world countries. Right? They come from countries who are now, as you mentioned, feeling the effects of this global climate change. But so they've been kind of, for a lack of better words, they've been kind of screwed in 2 ways, you know, like historically. And it's something that we need to continue to put a focus on and elevate that conversation when we're thinking about cultural identity, you know, when we're thinking about who it is that we're serving and what kind of ideas we're presenting. Because when we think about that cultural identity, like specifically here in Hawaii, the language was banned until 1986. So this isn't something that is of the past, you know, like this is only like one generation away that weren't able to speak their own language in their native country since the illegal overthrow of Queen Liliuokalani in 1893. So we're talking about like 80 some years, you know, of people not being able to practice who they are, not being able to like feel pride in who they are, you know, so at least in public spaces, you know, and that's unfortunate. So it's our duty, as specifically for me as someone who's an outsider, you know, like it's my duty to learn from cultural practitioners and share that knowledge with my students.
Yeah. And I'll close that gap even more. Sorry, Karina. Like from places that I've heard in Alaska and other villages, like we can close that gap. It's not just 80 years ago. It's like last month. There are places or people who are in authority at schools who are going, no, we're gonna like stop speaking your language, stop practicing your cult, like we're moving, we're assimilating, let's go. So it's terrifying. And we can still change it. So yeah.
That's such a good point that it happens, probably happened this past week. You're right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
definitely experienced those scenarios too when I was growing up in San Pedro Yolox, where we learned Spanish in schools, but we spoke a dialect in the village.
Yeah.
When we were talking
Yeah.
to our friends, the teachers who were also outsiders, funny enough,
Yeah.
they would be like, no, like we're here to learn.
Oh yeah.
Speak that at home, not here. And back then, teachers were allowed to hit us. And it's just that narrative. I experienced it. Kids still experienced it, which also reminds me of something that I learned in Senegal when I went there for study abroad internship. So in Senegal, which is in West Africa, I was able to be part of this network to learn more about just what took place there, which, going back to science, right? They were colonized by the French. The French used Senegal lands to plant a bunch of peanuts. Peanuts weren't native in the place, so it sucked up everything, all of the nutrients out of the soil. Finally, when the land was depleted, the French said, all right, Senegal, go ahead, be free, be independent, and just left them with the soil just being bad, and so many people died, and it was horrible. So when I went to learn, like what were some ways that they were working the land and just trying to do observations of the shift, one of the things that I experienced was doors closed. They were like, yeah, you're an outsider, you are not going to sit at this conversation, because what we're going to talk about, we're nothing against you, like you're a great person, we consider you a friend, but no, because the US takes and takes and they never give credit. This conversation, you're not welcome.
Wow.
And it was because I was there to learn and write notes and then report that back to the program that I was a part of. And I just remember at that point, at first, right, it was like, oh, okay, like I won't. Yeah, for sure. And also I'm in someone else's land and I respect that. And as I was sitting there thinking about it, I was like, that's so true. Like, I get that. Like, I'm one of you, but I also get what you're saying. And I respect it. And as much as it felt like you don't belong, because it was true. And it was just like all of the other scenarios where I'm sure they have come up with great solutions. And what happens? People take from it, never give credit. So I also wanted to bring that up, because we do have many of our students who sometimes they don't want to share, and it might not be because they don't know.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Precious to them that they don't want that to be taken. So I want to put that out there. And if that happens, like, it's okay. Just
it is.
And that's true. Let people have what they have, and not to feel that we're there to take it. So I really wanted to bring that up, and shout outs to all of my friends from Senegal who, after they met, they were like, hey, it's nothing about you though. Like, it's and I'm like, no, I get it. You don't have to explain. So just putting that out there.
No, thank you for bringing that specific point to the surface. I think that's so important. And I love in that story, I know this wasn't your point, but how you modeled being an ally, and respecting that process, and respecting that power or the authority that they have to decide when they're inviting people in and when they're not. On an individual level, you're a fantastic person. You would have, reported back amazing things, but you were able to, like, have enough humility and say, okay, like, I understand. And I just think that's what you modeled in your behavior there, and then what you learned from it, is something that I think all of us need to keep in mind and practice when we're doing this work, especially, like me, where I'm doing this and I'm not from that specific community. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I mean, we all in this space right now make decisions that affect a lot of kids on a daily basis. I mean, that's just the nature of our job. That's why we started this podcast. That's why we want to make schools cool to talk about, because it's so important. We affect, and all our listeners affect so many people.
Mhm.
And I think it's interesting because I don't think it always has to be so overt in the way that we disenfranchise kids or disenfranchise communities. Sometimes as
Yeah.
an elementary school educator, I think, I mean, I know we establish how important science is here and establishing the use of resources and things like that, because it really does drive economy in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
And when I think about my elementary school and I think about the choices we make, sometimes I think we lean heavier on reading and math, and understandably so. But
Well,
then you
yeah.
think about this
Who we're getting
nuanced
tested
discussion,
too? Like,
and those are decisions I've made for the past 10 years, is what classes do I focus in? Where do I
mm-hmm.
intervene? Where do I not intervene? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And those are decisions I need to wrestle with myself, because I think it's overt, you know what I mean? But it's also in those nuanced discussions that we have here. And I think y'all are right in saying we gotta listen. We gotta accept when we're wrong. We gotta accept when other people are right. And that's something that I'm wrestling with every single day. And I'm learning to listen to more people every single day, and thinking about listening to more people. You have brought an amazing
Yes.
first ever in our literature circle, a poem with a video attached
Yes.
from some really unique voices
Mhm.
Yeah.
that you don't get to hear all the time. You want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah. So this poem is called Rise from One Island to Another. And this is a Marshallese spoken word poet and climate advocate. Her name is Kathy Jitnil Kijiner. She also did this poem the specific poem that I brought with an indigenous woman from Greenland, and they created this beautiful visual spoken word, this video that just takes my breath away every single time. And it's talking about a lot of things that we've been discussing in this podcast today. And yeah, I'm not going to say too much about it because it's just, you got to listen to it. You got to watch it. But I heard about her when I was teaching at Konawaina. Believe one of my education assistants in the classroom was the one who told me about her. And so I would start playing it in class, and just watching the tone shift with all of my students, the empowerment that it gives to my Marshallese students, the reality check and maybe a little bit more respect that my other students who are not Marshallese then gave to Marshallese voices. I just think she is the coolest, and I'm so grateful for the work she's done to be the first in many different things, so that I have resources and beautiful poems to show my students and other people who need to hear her message.
Yes, actually, I have a story behind this one because you posted it on Facebook. And I remember this was around the unit that I've mentioned where titled Building Cultural Bridges. And we talk about global change and finding solutions.
Oh, cool.
And I remember I was scrolling on Facebook and then you posted it and said, you know, it's a must see. And I was watching it and I'm like, I am playing this when I get to school because this goes with the unit. And just
Oh,
like
sweet.
that you said, they were like, whoa, like this is powerful. The visual, the message, just everything. So I highly recommend everyone gets a chance to watch and listen to From One Island to Another, just because it's time to rise and to really come together and try to solve these issues that's affecting our planet. So thank you for bringing that up.
That's awesome. Oh, thanks for using it in your class.
And we'll make sure to post that, all those resources when we have this episode up. So look for it in the comment section in our post. And with that, you also had another book that you say you turn to a lot. whenever,
Yeah.
yeah, whenever you're reflecting on your journey. What is that book?
I think so. This is a book for teachers and for educators. This was what kind of sparked really diving into culturally relevant teaching for myself and my own practice. And so it's called Culturally Relevant Teaching in the Brain. And then the subtitle is Promoting Authentic Engagement and Rigor Among Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Students. And it's by Zaretta Hammond. It's a pretty well-known book. It's very readable. I would highly recommend educators to have it on your shelf. Ask your principals to buy a couple copies and have that in the staff room, or, you know, do a book study. I've done a book study with other educators at my school before using this. She links culturally relevant practices that we hear about and why they're important. And then she also goes into neuroscience and shows us developmentally why this is really important for students coming from diverse backgrounds.
Definitely going to check it out. I appreciate that. I love book clubs, and maybe this could be our next book club book, friends. As I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, Annalise was part of our Pedagogy of the Oppressed book club that took place over Zoom during the summer, and it was awesome. So definitely going to check out this book. Well, before we do leave, what do we do now as our advisory question? So this is where, you know, you give us some sweet, a little bow to take away with us. What would that be, Annalise?
It's kind of a big bow. This is gonna be like duct tape as opposed to a cute little bow. I really think elevating our local knowledge bearers in our classroom, and something I've been seeing a lot at the two schools that I'm at right now, is our para-educators and our education assistants. So often when we have misrepresentation of like background of teachers versus students, that's not normally the case when we look at paraeducators and students. A lot of times they're from the community. We're not seeing high turnover with them. They're there for a long time. So I think I would just encourage, you know, whatever that looks like now with COVID and distance learning, you know, take this time to kind of think about, like, what are ways that we can elevate them into positions of power, and thinking about different topics or ways that we teach our students. But then also I think just like grace and rest for all the teachers who are working right now. Man, your job description is changing every day, or sometimes multiple times a day. Everything is going wrong all the time, and you are still showing up for your kids. And there is nothing more important than that fact. The kids know that you care and that you're there. So whether the lesson is good, whether there are typos in the quiz, like you're showing up, and that's what they're going to remember. And so I'm rooting for you, as I'm not in a classroom this year. And I'm just really thankful for all of you, and we will continue to change the world. But this semester, it's okay if we're not changing the world. Like, you are changing the world by showing up. And we'll continue with all the big dreams and plans as we start to get back our classes.
That's right. That's right. And if you want to change our world here personally, to our YouTube watchers, make sure y'all leave a comment down below. Tell us what your favorite line was from Rise once Kev posts that in the description. To our podcast listeners, go ahead and leave us a review. Leave us 5 stars. Why wouldn't you? We're here supporting education. Thank you so much to everybody. Annalise, thank you so much for your time on this beautiful Aloha Sunday. And we hope.
Yeah.
Thanks for having me.
All the way from Alaska. Yeah. Thank you, Annalise. Thank you for everything, for being an awesome individual. Again, I'm so honored to have you here. I consider you a great friend, and thank you for spending your Sunday with us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Till next time.